I'm Nicole Jocelyn. I'm the chair of the Austin Housing Coalition, and we are partnering with Austin Women in Housing and Housing Works and the Austin Home Repair Coalition to host these forums so that we can have a chance to discuss affordable housing with our candidates and kind of understand their perspective a little bit more. We held a briefing a few weeks ago for candidates to have a chance to sit one-on-one with the organizations and talk about different things that we're concerned about. And this forum is specifically for the mayor's race, District 8 and District 5. Next weekend we'll have District 1, 3, and 9 as well as the mayor's race. And that will be at First United Methodist Church Saturday afternoon. So there's a flyer over on the table with that information if you're interested in those districts as well. There's also flyers for each of the organizations. And I just want to thank Foundation Communities for hosting us here. This is a beautiful property, and we're so lucky to be able to have this as part of our city and provide affordable housing for families here and have community events here. So a little logistics for the day. There are bathrooms over here on the side, and we'll spend the first hour talking with mayoral candidates, and then we'll have District 5 for a few minutes at 2, and then we'll wrap up with District 8. And the way that this is sort of going to work, we're going to give each candidate 1 minute to introduce themselves, and then our moderators will ask 2 questions based on a survey that we gave to the candidates with specific questions about affordable housing and how to support it. And each candidate will get 2 minutes each to respond to those questions, and then we're just going to open up to all of y'all. And whatever questions you have, please ask them. Try to keep your questions to about 30 seconds so that we can have some time for responses from all the candidates. And we'll have a timekeeper up front, so all of you guys pay attention to these red signs over here, because they're going to tell you how much time you have left. So thank you all again so much for coming, and I hope you learned a lot here. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm Michael Wiltz here on behalf of the Austin Housing Coalition. Excited to have 4 of the mayoral candidates here today. We'll start with Mayor Adler and brief comments on why you're running, what you hope to accomplish. We'll start this way and go down, and then after the first question, Alex, we'll start with you answering, and we'll work back this way.
All right. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate the session a week or 2 ago. I appreciate the opportunity to be there and be able to say thank you to the folks that do the work in the trenches. I'm Steve Adler. I'm running for re-election. I'm real proud to have been part of a 10-1 council that I think has done more for housing than really any council in the past has been able to do, because it's been a focus of this council. 2 real big challenges in the city: mobility and affordability. They're intertwined. We're not going to solve one without solving the other. And then on affordability, 2 ways to deal with that. You either help things cost less, or you help people make more money. We're dealing with the second half of that with the regional workforce development plan. But on housing, we have lots of challenges at lots of different levels, and I think the council passing the housing blueprint was a real significant step, because it focused us all and it identified the metrics and the goals we need to meet. I placed 3 of those at the highest priority for me, and that's housing for folks that are making less than 25%, 30% of mean family income, because we need to do that. Permanent supportive housing for folks that are homeless, and then home ownership opportunities for people who are making 85% and below of mean family income. This council has moved millions of dollars into the Housing Trust Fund, increased it by over 500%. We've planted over 2,000 affordable units, 5,000 that are in planning. We've moved forward with the Homestead Preservation District. We've moved millions of dollars into permanent supportive housing, into the homelessness in the city. We put on the ballot Proposition A, which would by 4-fold be the largest investment that the city's ever made in affordable housing. We've looked at the land development process to streamline it, as well as to expedite housing opportunities for people that are building affordable housing. We're recalibrating the density bonus program in the city. We're actively doing, and we have to do 1,000 different things in order to be able to get ahead of it. But I'm just real proud to be part of a council that's named Homelessness and Housing as the top 2 strategic priorities in our strategic plan. Thank you.
This one. You have to keep this on this side. Hi, everybody. My name is Travis Duncan. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very grateful to be a part of all of the forums, especially given we are running essentially a $0 campaign as close to as possible. We're intentionally not fundraising because I believe that money in politics is the source of corruption. So, we're really doing a grassroots campaign, and we're grateful for all the participation. Affordability is an interesting topic because I come from a community of people who have eliminated their cost of living because they use smart technology and they use earth resonant materials to build. So we actually have the opportunity to build a building just like this, as well as single family units all across the city in a way that actually eliminates utility bills, eliminates the need to pay rent through cooperative models, through sweat equity models. And I believe we need a right to return program for indigenous people who have roots to this land, as well as people who have been displaced in their families over the past century due to the market-driven policies. And that's the real question here, is that our system has been set up out of, actually in disagreement with the fact of our planet, which is that we live on an abundant planet. And in a market context, it always creates losers. There's always people on the outside. And so right now, there's plenty of people who would be willing to contribute, who want to be a part of a cooperative system, who don't have that door open to them, who don't have that option. And so what I'm proposing is that we open new doors. So when I'm the mayor, I'm not going to close any doors for people who want to build houses in the typical way. What I'm saying is we need to open new doors for people to have a cooperative system, to earn a new type of housing, a futuristic type of housing that we can have now, so we can literally eliminate the cost of living. That's true affordability. So, we can talk about how energy relates to that, how water and resources relate to that. Our plan is universal resource access, which really will create the most freedom for all of us to live our purpose rather than being imprisoned by the wage clock. So we are here to bring the latest technology to assert that it is the people's right to develop and to challenge the notion that for-profit developers can dictate what type of housing is available for people. And I'll just close quickly and just say that, while I appreciate the median family income argument, because I think it's framed with a good intention, I think it's a disgrace, unfortunately, because it presupposes that because someone doesn't have money, they have to access a lower quality of housing. And because of the abundance of this planet, I believe that everybody deserves the best housing. So, turn it over to Alex now. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alex Stranger, and I am a pedicab driver in downtown Austin, meaning that I'm the only candidate running for any office whatsoever that actually needs for Austin to be affordable in order to live here. Look, since I've moved here, rent's gone up over 33%, and property taxes have increased by over $1,500. Yes, this has something to do with the fact that this is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, and people are moving here in droves because of a lot of the great things that Austin has to offer: its diversity, its tolerance, its accepting nature, our waterways, Barton Springs, 6th Street, the live music. I understand that completely, but when we let a lot of these large multinational California companies walk all over us, bypass paying property taxes, pre-court, and then we waived the fee and lieu we waived the affordable housing requirements for developers to build, and they pay a fee and lieu that's pittance for what's actually necessary to build affordable housing units. Well, it makes you wonder where our priorities going to lie in terms of making Austin more affordable. So that being said, I'm not going to go too long about this. I think that we need a lot more transparency in City Hall. We need to put our foot down more when it comes to interacting with these developers, and we also need to make these new businesses coming in to understand that there are rules that they have to abide by, and they need to pay their fair share of tax to the city, and they need to actually do a much better job of offering real tangible community benefits that will help Austin as a whole and not just a select few people.
Thanks, Alex. First question I have is about the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint. You referenced it, Mayor. It was adopted in April of 2017. It calls for an ambitious number, 135,000 units over the next 10 years. And these range from extremely low income to 120% median family income and above. How will you measure the city's progress towards meeting the goals laid out in the blueprint? And what's the most important thing the city can do to make sure we're staying on track?
Well, I think that we need to build according to how the city is growing and according to the market. And I think that one thing we should not be doing is we should not be trying to expedite the growth by inviting new companies like Amazon to go into office that are going to substantially raise the median family income and increase the population tremendously when we're already a very jam-packed and cramped city having problems adjusting to our growth as it is. I also think that when it comes to building these affordable housing units at 30 to 50% MFI, we have to set a priority that those units get built first before any of these other units get built, and that's what I plan on doing.
Thanks, Alex.
So it's really crucial. Thank you for that question, because this is really important. We see these pictures a lot of the comparing the skylines from 2005 and then 2017. There's one that's floating around, and you see how much development has gone up on this land that was geologically assigned for dense urban populations. Now those buildings, just to say, I mean, not to look back, but it's important to point out that all of those buildings could have been net zero, carbon sequestering, rainwater capturing, and actually ecologically sound, but instead they have contributed to our environmental disaster. So it's important to recognize, I think the very first thing we need to do is establish that those housing units are not harming our environment, harming our ecology. And this is why I say that the city has a high level of hypocrisy when it comes to addressing climate change and social inequities, because we have to mandate, actually, that all new development across the entire city is net zero and rainwater capturing and everything. So that's the first metric we have to establish. And then the next piece is that I think we need to challenge the prior right of a developer to dictate what happens on a particular piece of land. So again, I will say it is the people's collective right to develop, to build. So we have a plan, and it's very inspired by this contributionism cooperative network, which essentially allows us to build much greater, much quicker than any other system. So I know we have 10 seconds, but it's interesting trying to talk about these issues in 1 minute. I'll say what we need is love. It's really important. What we need is love.
So I think the question that you asked was, how do we measure our success against the 135,000 home goal in the strategic blueprint, and then what can we be doing generally at the level to achieve that? And I think when we're counting, but we have to count lots of different things. It's been suggested that in order to have 135,000 new homes, that we actually have to have the availability and ability to put in twice that. So there's a greater number of potential opportunities that we have to be able to create in this city to make that happen. One way we do that is we revise the land development code to remove some of the obstacles that exist so that we can actually get the density of home ownership that we want along corridors and in centers around the community so that we're not everybody focused on downtown. And then when we're taking a look at that number, we have to recognize that that's just not a single number, that is actually reflective of a strata of homes. There's a goal that we have of homes for people that are making less than $25,000 a year, and our gap there is 48,000 homes, 60,000 home gap for people that are making less than 60 to 80% of need family income. So we have to pay real attention to the number of homes and the number of opportunities that are being created in each one of those strata. And then we have to make sure that we provide the ground, till the land for that to be able to happen. And with respect to affordable housing in the areas that we need it the most, at the levels where we have the greatest need, it's going to take a considerable amount of money because that's homes and housing that we have to subsidize in the city. So it's finding as many sources of income that we can and revenue that we can possibly find. So the bond, Proposition A, is a big component of that, but also looking at TIFs, looking at private-public partnerships, looking at the ways that we can offer more attractive opportunities for people to be able to build.
Thank you, Mayor, and we'll stay with you to answer this question first. When considering affordable housing developments that could be supported by the city, whether that's financially or through a letter of support or developments that could be located on city-owned land, what are the top 3 to 5 criteria you would use to evaluate those developments and see if they're worthy of support?
I think the criteria that I would be looking at would be, first, does it meet the strategic housing blueprint goals? Because I think we have to continually go back to that document because that's where we set the metrics and the measures in the plan. But within that, I think we have to look at the location. Is it going into a high opportunity area? Because I think that's our greatest need. It's also our greatest expense. But if we're going to have mixed income opportunities throughout the city, we have to look at location, high opportunity areas. We have to look at the number of units and then the depth of affordability that can be achieved in any project, rewarding those projects that get us the most in terms of affordability to our greatest areas. You have to look at access to transit and to jobs and to amenities in communities so that you're enabling people to be in as complete and walkable situations as you possibly can. You need to look at how we're leveraging those projects. Are we getting the greatest private investment for the amount of subsidy that the taxpayers are putting in so that we can spread the reach and really leverage what we're able to do.
Oh, thanks.
Sorry.
So, number one, again, I have to say this as many times as I can for us to understand this. If we continue to build the same way we've been building, we're shooting ourselves in the foot and we're just going to have to demolish it in the future. So we need to start thinking about, can we build housing that will maximize human vitality for 1,000 years? How can we build the next pyramids? How can we be great? Just really amazing. Austin doesn't have to be like the rest of the world and perpetuate a class system and focus on the strata and reinforce this notion that because somebody doesn't have money, they deserve a lower quality of life. So it's important that we start from that perspective. And again, I think it's actually reasonable that we mandate that all new construction be net zero and rainwater capturing and using carbon sequestering concretes, which we can source locally. So there's a lot more on that ecological front. So ecologically sound, is really important. Obviously, access to transit and the key services. And we also need to look at how can we build in a way that creates new regenerative revenue streams for the people. The People's Fund, which we have come to know as the government, the city budget, which I would like to flip our understanding of that and call it the People's Fund. If we view the city of Austin like one big cooperative business that we're all equal owners in, then we will have much more opportunity. And when I'm the mayor, we can actually eliminate the need for taxation and quadruple our budget through profit-sharing entities. So, regenerative.
Okay, so my three basic criteria for where to build affordable housing, it's very simple, all right? So A, equitable access to public transportation. You know, as Stephen mentioned, that in order to have affordable housing, you need a certain number of affordable units and economic opportunities. Well, there's a third measure involved that kind of got pushed to the side, and it's transportation time. You know, it's if you're spending 3 hours commuting to and from work every single day, and you got to walk a mile to a bus stop, and you got to plan your schedule on walking to a bus or to a train or to a rail, or you're stuck in traffic on 183, which is probably going to get worse when that soccer stadium gets built, FYI. That's less time that you're going to have to spend with your kids. That's less time you're going to have, having a healthy work-life balance. That's less time that you're going to have building a business that you want to build or create. And, those factors go into the income you generate. And the income you generate determines whether or not the city you live in is going to be affordable. Another factor that I think needs to be mentioned are the accessibility to wellness and educational opportunities. I know that I live at Ethos Apartments right now, and the person who one of the ladies at the desk was telling me that at the last affordable unit she worked at, they had education classes, they had fitness classes, they had vocational training for the people that were in these buildings, and I think that that's a big component towards building affordable units here in Austin. And I think the last thing I'm going to mention really quickly is there needs to be a proximity to good schools. That's, I think, pretty self-explanatory. If you're going to live in an affordable area and you have kids in a family, well, your kids deserve the same right to an education that everybody else does, and the proximity to a good school is the first step towards, achieving that.
Thanks, Alex, and again, we'll stay with you to answer this question first. In the aftermath of ending Code Next, we're left with the land development code that hasn't been significantly written since 1984. What changes, if any, would you push for immediately to the land development code that could best promote affordability or create more affordable housing opportunities?
Well, I think we need to restructure our planning commission. Over half of the people on our commission are connected to the real estate industry in some way, shape, or form. So I think that needs to change, just so that our land code winds up falling in line with the interests of the average everyday person in Austin, and not developers that are already kind of running rampant all over the city. And I think the other thing that we need to do is we need our land code to be written by our various neighborhood planning commissions. They need to have a much greater say in how our next land code is implemented.
So this actually highlights what 1984 and then also what just happened through the Code Next process highlights exactly the problem with our approach to land development code, is that we try to do one big blanket new code and expect that to meet our needs over time. The reality is that we learn something new every single building that goes up. So I think we need to approach our land development code in a more fluid, adaptable context. Meaning, wow, we just built this new building. What did we learn on that building? How can we adjust for that? How can we be fluid so we constantly are updating the code? So because there's we are in a rapid acceleration right now of new technologies, and if we write a code and then expect that to last for 10 years, 20 years, we're just gonna have the same conversation in another 20 years. So that's the first thing. Again, the reason why I'm voting against Prop J is because I'm concerned that it's gonna cause another couple years delay of us doing what we really need to do, which we should have done and could have done 20 years ago, which is mandate that everything be ecologically sound. Again, this is the core issue. The development and construction industry is very closely linked to the fossil fuel industry. Even if we have affordable units, we are still building with petrochemical toxic materials that leach into the water supply, that damage this environment. And we need to get serious about protecting the environment. And that's a really important factor in affordability because it actually reduces the cost of living. So let's not think in scarcity mentality, let's think abundantly. And let's acknowledge that we have the technology to eliminate cost of living. What would that look like in Austin? That is true affordability.
Well, I certainly agree, even with code next stopping, that we can't stop. We have a land development code, as you point out, that's 30 years old and has been amended hundreds of times. It contradicts itself, it's hard to apply, it makes building anything in the city take longer than it should and cost more than it should. We're losing people and we're losing communities. We have homes that are being torn down and big homes being built up. We have problems with localized flooding and congestion. And while the code's not an answer to these, it's certainly part of the answer to these, which is why we have to finish that work. In terms of the timing and the speed and what goes first, I really want to see what the manager comes back with in his process and his review, which I think is going to come really quickly because of the importance for the city. And I think we need to give the manager the opportunity to be able to look at what worked, what didn't work, what we need to carry forward and the like. That said, I think there are some real important things that we're going to need to work on really quickly. My belief is that we have to make the decision whether we're doing it globally or whether we're going to be doing it in smaller pieces, and I don't know the answer to that yet. But it's clear that we have to move forward with calibrating the bonus density programs that we have in the city, and I was proud to provide the leadership and joined by a council I'm really proud to serve on, where we've now brought that up, teed that up for that to happen here quickly, to make sure that that actually gets used and that the fees in lieu equate to the actual cost of building in the city. There are certain community benefits that we need to move forward on, and we need to be taking a look at whether we can expedite building or waive fees associated with projects that have child care, for example, and there's going to be a resolution in front of the council this coming meeting to deal with that. ADUs in the city so that they can be built more quickly and more cheaply. Any kind of affordable housing project we have in the city. And then we need to look at the development we do in the meantime with respect to building the support for mass transit in the city.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one more question, and then I'll take any questions from the audience after that. Homelessness advocates almost unanimously agree that the solution to ending homelessness is creating barrier-free, permanent supportive housing units. But what can the city do or improve on to create more of these units?
We need to create more permanent supportive housing units in the city. Those questions at a threshold place is all about money. How do we create the resources necessary to be able to do that in a grand way? I refer everyone back to Proposition A that's going to be voted on in November because that's the single most important thing that we could do in order to be able to generate the revenue to be able to support that. But in addition to GO bonds, we need to take a look at TIFs, tax increment financing in the city, and project in areas so that we can use that dollars for those kinds of programs. And we are now looking at the Waller Creek TIF in the city to see if we can do that. We also have the ability with the TPID, the Tourist Improvement District, to be able to generate a recurring and dedicated income stream of $10 million a year toward homelessness situation in our city that could be spent not only on services but also on permanent supportive housing in the city. So for us, it's finding as many different income streams as we can to leverage the dollars that we have, because the permanent supportive housing is housing at the levels of greatest need, which means that it's going to require the greatest amount of subsidies in order to be able to provide that.
Yeah, this is, again, one of the core reasons I'm running. A lot of people in our tribe, our family, our network have experienced homelessness, are really on the front lines of this. And, you know, I think it's great that the mayor has done well for him and their family. I think it's important, though, that we really get rooted in the community and spend time with poor people and really ask them what they want and talk to homeless people. And the last thing that somebody who's experiencing homelessness wants is to get back in the rat race. What we need are systems that can liberate people from that system and provide a space for them to feel a sense of dignity, a sense of permanency, and to have a space for healing. And so again, just to really quickly explain how this cooperative system works, we start with the fact that money does nothing. People do everything. So what is really simple is we can use electricity as an incentive, or we can offer free electricity for anybody who is willing to volunteer. With, for example, Habitat for Humanity, we could have an influx of 10,000 volunteers every weekend. What could y'all do with that? That's pretty amazing. And we can do that because of new energy technology that we're bringing to the table. So we can build a series of what you might call eco-villages that some are focused on plant medicine healing because the spiritual and the physiological healing is a big aspect of homelessness, but also providing an opportunity for build to own programs. So this is a very important topic, and you know we need to address this now.
All right. I think there are two things that we could do almost immediately to help fight this homeless situation in a very big way. And I think the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that there's complete debt forgiveness for our homeless when it comes to the utility companies. Because a lot of people can't really rent or get housing because they owe money to the utility companies and they're stuck on the street. So I think we need to have debt forgiveness for the utility companies. And the other thing I want to mention is I work downtown as a pedicab driver, and I see these homeless people constantly. Like I see them all the time, And it saddens me to say this, but a lot of these people are drug addicts, and they need to get clean. And I think that we need to do a much better job of building and having better sobriety centers for these people to go to if they want to detox. That's pretty much it. I think we need to address these two basic things first before we go any further, because these are really, really important things that need to be addressed, and these things really need to be addressed. I wish I could elaborate. I wish I could, go on and on and on about it, but I don't think that's really necessary. It's pretty basic, and this should be addressed immediately.
Thanks, Alex. We have time for a couple questions from the audience.
If you raise your hand, I'll bring you a microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Bajitsky, and I'm a member of Austin Women in Housing. And we focus most of our concerns on renters in the city who represent like 56% of households. My question is about code and the enforcement of our health and safety codes, especially as it relates to the repeat offender program. What can you do to have code do a better job?
Alex?
Well, I think that's a very broad question. I'm going to be really honest. I think that when it comes to that, I think that all repeat offenders should always have an equal opportunity to show that they've been rehabilitated so that they can re-enter into society in order to be productive members. That being said, this is an issue that I am going to need to learn more about, and I'm really excited to collaborate with each and every single one of y'all to help facilitate this and address it properly.
That's actually an interesting answer, but I wanted to clarify that when I used the term repeat offender, I was talking about properties that consistently are in violation of the health and safety codes and are actually included on a list that is maintained by the city.
Oh.
So I don't know what
Okay,
the
I thought you were
moderator
talking about
wants to
myself.
do
Okay, I
about
was-
this, but, you know, that's what I meant.
Um,
The reentry roundtable is addressing the issue about the other repeat offenders.
yeah, so I was, okay, you know, to be honest, I think that if you're in repeat violation of these codes, there need to be some serious economic sanctions that are levied. And like I said, I'm excited to work with you and talk to you more about what those sanctions and penalties can be, because there should be no reason for that. I think everybody should have the right to equitable living.
So, you know, my wife and I are good examples of people who have had to move further out from the city to afford to live, and we have to commute more and all of these things. And you know, when we were looking for housing, we saw many places that some guy was just showing it to us. And they said, the landlord lives in New York or California, and they just bought like 100 houses in Austin, and they really don't care. They don't take care of the people's housing. I remember we talked about this at the briefing, how the city's enforcement department, the legal department really is, there's something going on with them. They're not doing their job, or they don't have an incentive, or there's miscommunication, or there's something wrong there, right? So first we need to look at what are the enforcement mechanisms. The other thing too is a lot of these property owners that are renting homes to people, they don't live here. So what in effect is happening, you have money being extracted from our local economy. I'm never in favor of a penalty model, because I think incentive is always stronger, and we talked about this as well. How do we incentivize landlords to do the right thing? I don't know the exact answer to that question. I think we need to have community discussions. That's why the first 100 days after I'm inaugurated, we're gonna do 100 town halls all across the city. And we're gonna have no buzzer, we're gonna get really deep, and we're gonna listen to each other with heart, and we're gonna find out these solutions, and it's gonna actually accelerate the pace at which we can find these solutions. On the issue of these landlords who are violating, we have to figure something out, and I would like to find some way to maybe shift the tax burden to those out-of-town landlords, if possible, so we can relieve the tax burden from local people, local families who are regenerating this economy here locally.
So this is a council that spent a fair amount of time looking at the repeat offender program in the city to try to help improve on lots of different levels. With respect to policing, because the council, I think, pushed back against that, there's an entirely new leadership in that department now, and that area is being reorganized. It gets tied to reporting issues that are in the city, where people make reports, and there's allegations of retaliation, and people don't really know what to do with respect to making reporting. So this is a council that's put money against providing legal services for tenants. We've put money and approvals and support behind tenants organizing the same way labor unions organize, so the tenants have the collective power to be able to push agendas. We've also taken a look at, and the council has increased sanctions for folks that are on that list and don't get off that list. And then we've taken a pretty active role with respect to some specific properties. There was one that the city was involved in litigation on. You may know up at the airport near I-35. And the council took, for the first time, a pretty hard stance with respect to litigation involving that, and it ended up with a new buyer coming in and taking over that property, and then working with that new buyer on the property to be able to improve conditions at the site. But there's a lot that we should be doing to help tenants in this city. And the part of the answer to this question is probably part of the answer to every question that we're going to be asked at this forum here today, and that's to vote yes on Prop A, because there's money in Prop A that's specifically identified for tenants and preserving opportunity to be able to stay in place with repair money and other kinds of things as well.
Does anybody have another question?
All right, so my last question's on displacement. The council just got a briefing, perhaps the most exhaustive briefing, or the most exhaustive report to date on displacement, particularly in the Eastern Crescent. What are the key takeaways that you identify from that report, and any strategies to address displacement that's already happened, ongoing displacement, and to address displacement permanently as well?
I think it's real significant that the city council, this 10-1 council, in one of the budget riders associated with the budget that we just passed, gave instruction to the city manager and the city staff to address displacement and affordability and the implementation of Proposition A with no less sense of urgency as was put toward the mobility bond that was passed in 2016. Even including increasing the capacity in the city to be able to implement the components of Proposition A in a much quicker time than would otherwise be possible. With respect to displacement, I think the takeaway from that specific report that we got was that different parts of the city are at different places in terms of displacement, early displacement and late displacement, and it's a continuum. And that the tools that we have, which this report was able to identify a lot of them, have different application in different areas of the city. And we have to make sure that we're targeting the specific solution to the specific area where it can do the greatest amount of good. The other thing that it points out to us is that if we don't do that, if we're not attacking displacement even before it happens in an area, just as it's beginning to show early signs, that it becomes that much more expensive and that much more difficult to be able to address displacement later. And while there's still things we need to be doing all over the city, I think that was an important takeaway. Another takeaway from that report is it's not by itself. That report came out at the same time almost that the Task Force on Displacement is going to be giving the council its report in November, and I was happy to help take the lead in setting that up. We have the staff coming back with its review of the people's plans for displacement. It's going to be making a report on that. So we have all these things that are happening at the same time. It is at the epicenter priority now.
So we first have to provide and acknowledge that the original displacement here happened a couple hundred years ago of the indigenous people. And there are no real indigenous rights here in the state of Texas. I would like to see the city of Austin lead on that and provide right to return for indigenous peoples that have a history to this land, as well as for people and their families who have been displaced over the past century, like I said. So I think it's important to acknowledge that because, the people in the real estate industry view this as, oh, this is a win for these people. They bought their house for $3,000 and they're selling it for $600,000. This is great. It's a great return on their investment. This is the kind of mentality that is perpetuating this problem. And it was never about the money for these families. It was about a home. And so we have to acknowledge that there's a sort of economic pressure that causes people to have to sell. And it obviously relates back to how we tax. And I understand that the state is a big barrier to this in a lot of ways. I would like to challenge the state in a new way based on the fact that the people are the ones that give the authority to the state to begin with, and that it's actually a public safety matter, a matter of public health, that we ensure that people aren't being taxed out of their homes. That's one big issue with this, and this is so deep, such a big issue. We really need heart, and we need to get to the core of the issue and respect all human life. Everybody deserves the best, and we have abundance to provide that.
All right, how do we address displacement here in Austin? aside from maybe not offering large tax incentives to for-profit companies to build a soccer stadium on, the #1 designated area for affordable housing, I think that, I think that we need to restructure who's on our planning commission, and we also need to have a better land code that is a people-centered land code that is devised and implemented by our various neighborhood planning commissions instead of members of the real estate and development industry, which is why Code Next turned out to be an absolute disaster. Here's another thing, right? Over 19 bus stops got cut in East Austin, in disadvantaged areas filled with predominantly African American residents. And while I'll conclude by saying this: it doesn't take a task force on institutional racism to realize that that is a bad idea.
Thanks, Alex, and thank you to the candidates as well. We'll take a brief 10-minute break, and then we'll turn over to District 5. Thank you.